Detective James Rodriguez had been having one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong. His coffee maker broke on Monday, his car wouldn't start on Tuesday, and by Wednesday his supervisor had pulled him aside for yet another talk about his attitude. Now it was Thursday afternoon and he was cruising down Highway 87, hoping for a quiet end to his shift. The black SUV that zoomed past him was doing at least 60 in a 45 zone. Rodriguez sighed and flipped on his lights. Another speeding ticket to write, another person who would probably argue with him about it. He pulled the vehicle over in the parking lot of a small shopping center, watching as the driver carefully positioned the car away from other vehicles. As he approached the SUV, Rodriguez could see the driver through the rear window. She was a well-dressed black woman who appeared to be in her late 40s, speaking into what looked like a wireless earpiece. Her voice was calm and professional, the kind of tone you'd hear in a business meeting. She seemed to be wrapping up an important conversation. "I understand the timeline is tight," she was saying as Rodriguez reached her window. "We'll need to move the meeting to 4:30, but make sure everyone knows this is still a priority." The woman noticed Rodriguez waiting and quickly ended her call. She rolled down her window with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something about her presence that commanded respect, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, already reaching for her purse. "I assume this is about my speed. I apologize for that." Rodriguez had expected the usual arguments or excuses he normally heard during traffic stops. Instead, this woman was taking responsibility right away. It should have made his job easier. But something about her composed manner irritated him. Maybe it was the expensive-looking business suit she wore, or the way she spoke like someone used to being in charge. "License and registration," Rodriguez said, his tone sharper than necessary. The woman handed over her documents without hesitation. Her license showed the name Victoria Johnson, with an address in the expensive part of town. The registration was for a government vehicle, which explained the official-looking plates he'd noticed earlier. "Do you know how fast you were going?" Rodriguez asked, studying her license. "Probably around 60, she replied honestly. "I'm running late for an important meeting, but that's no excuse for speeding. I take full responsibility." Rodriguez found himself annoyed by her calm admission. Most people lied or made excuses. This woman's straightforward honesty felt almost like she was talking down to him, as if she was too important to waste time with games. "Important meeting, huh?" Rodriguez said, looking up from her license. "What kind of work do you do, Ms. Johnson?" "I work in law enforcement," she replied simply. That answer caught Rodriguez off guard. He looked at her again, taking in her professional appearance and the way she'd handled the stop so far. But he'd never seen her around the department, and he knew most of the local law enforcement personnel. "Which department?" he asked. "Federal level," she said, not offering more details. Rodriguez felt his irritation growing. Federal agents always thought they were better than local cops. They came into town with their fancy suits and government cars, acting like they owned the place. This woman probably worked some desk job and thought that made her special. "Well, federal or not, you were still speeding," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on an edge. 15 over the limit." "You're absolutely right," Victoria agreed. "I should have left earlier to account for traffic." Her continued politeness was starting to grate on Rodriguez's nerves. He'd had a terrible week, his supervisor was on his case, and now he had to deal with some federal bureaucrat who probably made twice his salary and thought she was too important for traffic laws. As Rodriguez wrote the ticket, he found himself glancing back at Victoria. She was making another phone call, speaking quietly but with obvious authority. He caught fragments of her conversation about security protocols and coordination with local departments. Whatever she did, it sounded important. When Rodriguez returned to her window with the ticket, Victoria was just ending her call. She looked up at him with that same professional politeness, waiting patiently for him to finish his job. "Here's your citation," Rodriguez said, handing over the paperwork. "You can pay it online or contest it in court." "Thank you, officer," Victoria said, taking the ticket and glancing at it briefly. "Is there anything else you need?" Something about the way she asked the question rubbed Rodriguez the wrong way. It sounded almost dismissive, like she was ready to be done with him and get back to her important federal business. He noticed her hair was styled in an elaborate twist that probably cost more than he made in a day. Everything about her screamed money and status. "Actually, there is," Rodriguez said, his voice hardening. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Victoria's expression didn't change, but Rodriguez caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise maybe, or concern. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly. "Routine check," Rodriguez lied. "Sometimes we need to do a more thorough inspection." Victoria studied his face for a moment, and Rodriguez got the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through his made-up excuse. But after a brief pause, she nodded and began to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Of course," she said quietly. As Victoria stepped out of her vehicle, Rodriguez noticed several things about her. She moved with the confidence of someone used to being in control, but there was also a wariness in her eyes now. She was clearly trying to figure out why this routine traffic stop was suddenly becoming something more. Rodriguez looked her over, taking in her expensive suit, her perfectly styled hair, and her calm demeanor. Everything about this woman seemed to represent the kind of success and authority that had always been just out of his reach. And right now, with his career stalled and his confidence shaken, that success felt like a personal insult. "Nice hair," Rodriguez commented, his tone making it clear the compliment wasn't sincere. "Must have cost a fortune." Victoria's expression remained neutral, but Rodriguez saw her jaw tighten slightly. She was finally starting to understand that this wasn't about the speeding ticket anymore. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance," she said carefully. "Just making conversation," Rodriguez replied, but his smile had a cruel edge to it. The afternoon sun caught the highlights in Victoria's perfectly styled hair, and Rodriguez found himself fixated on it. Everything about this woman represented the kind of life he'd never have, the kind of respect he'd never earn, and suddenly, looking at her standing there in her expensive clothes with her government job and her perfect hair, Rodriguez felt an overwhelming urge to knock her down a peg, to remind her that right now in this moment, he was the one with the power. It was a feeling that would soon lead to the biggest mistake of his career. Rodriguez stepped closer to Victoria, his hand moving to his utility belt. The afternoon heat was making him sweat, but that wasn't the only reason his palms felt damp. Something dark was building inside him, a mixture of frustration and resentment that he'd been carrying around for months. "You know what I think?" Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a conversational tone that didn't match the tension in his eyes. "I think people like you forget where you come from." Victoria remained perfectly still, but Rodriguez could see her calculating the situation. Her training was probably telling her to de-escalate, to keep things professional. But Rodriguez was past caring about professional. "People like me?" Victoria asked quietly, her voice carefully controlled. "Federal agents," Rodriguez said, though they both knew that wasn't what he meant. "Coming through our town in your government cars, thinking you're better than the rest of us." Victoria's phone buzzed with what sounded like an urgent message, but she didn't dare look away from Rodriguez to check it. The parking lot around them was mostly empty, just a few scattered cars belonging to people shopping in the small strip mall nearby. "Officer Rodriguez," Victoria said, reading his name tag. "I think there might be some misunderstanding here. I've been nothing but respectful during this stop." "Respectful," Rodriguez repeated like the word tasted bitter. "Sure, you've been polite. Real professional. But I can see it in your eyes. You think you're slumming it talking to some small-town cop?" Victoria took a careful breath. In her years of law enforcement, she'd dealt with hostile suspects, dangerous criminals, and high-pressure situations that would break most people. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that made her skin crawl. "I don't think that at all," she said firmly. "Law enforcement is law enforcement, regardless of level. We're all trying to do the same job." Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The same job? Lady, you probably make more in a month than I see all year. You drive government cars and have government expense accounts and government everything. Don't tell me we're doing the same job." Victoria's phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. She could see Rodriguez's eyes darting to it, his irritation growing with each interruption. She knew she should answer it. Knew that people were probably wondering where she was, but she also knew that moving right now might escalate things further. "Your phone seems pretty popular," Rodriguez observed. "Must be nice being so important that people can't wait 5 minutes to talk to you." "It's just work," Victoria said simply. "Just work," Rodriguez echoed. "Everything's just work for people like you, isn't it? This whole town is probably just work to you. Just another stop on your important federal business." Rodriguez was pacing now, a small circle around Victoria that made her feel trapped. She'd been in dangerous situations before, but those had clear rules. Criminals were criminals. This was a police officer, someone who was supposed to be on the same side as her, and that made everything more complicated. "Officer Rodriguez," Victoria said, trying to inject some authority into her voice without being confrontational. "I think this traffic stop has gone on long enough. If you're not planning to arrest me for something, I'd like to get back on the road." The moment the words left her mouth, Victoria knew she'd made a mistake. Rodriguez's face darkened, and she could see his pride taking over whatever small part of him might have still been reasonable. "You'd like to get back on the road?" Rodriguez said slowly. "You think you can just tell me when this stop is over?" Victoria's training kicked in. She could see the situation spiraling out of control, could recognize the signs of someone whose anger was overriding their judgment. She'd seen it before in suspects who were about to do something they couldn't take back. "I didn't mean to overstep," Victoria said carefully. "I'm just conscious of the time, and I know you probably have other duties to attend to." But Rodriguez was no longer listening to her words. He was staring at her hair again, at the elaborate style that had taken her stylist over an hour to perfect that morning. Victoria had grown up poor, had worked her way through college and law school, had earned every position she'd ever held. But Rodriguez saw only the surface, only the success without the struggle. "That hair," Rodriguez said suddenly, "must have cost more than my car payment." Victoria felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. There was something in Rodriguez's voice now that went beyond anger or resentment. There was something dangerous. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, her voice taking on the tone she'd used to command rooms full of federal agents. "I'm going to need you to step back." But Rodriguez wasn't backing down. Instead, he was reaching for something on his belt. Victoria's eyes tracked his movement, trying to assess the threat. When she saw what he was pulling out, her blood turned cold. It was a small pair of scissors, the kind emergency responders use to cut seatbelts or clothing in rescue situations. Every officer carried them, but Victoria had never seen them used like this. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp with alarm. "Just having a little fun," Rodriguez said, but his smile was ugly and cruel. "You know what? I think your hair would look better a little shorter." Victoria stepped backward, but Rodriguez moved with her. The scissors gleamed in the afternoon sun, and Victoria realized that this situation had moved far beyond a simple traffic stop gone wrong. This was about to become an assault. "Officer Rodriguez, you need to stop right now," Victoria said, her voice carrying all the authority she could muster. "Put those scissors away and step back." But Rodriguez was past listening to reason. All the frustration of his stalled career, all the resentment he'd been building up, all the anger at a world that seemed to reward people like Victoria, while leaving people like him behind. It was all focused into this one moment. "Hold still," Rodriguez said, reaching toward Victoria's carefully styled hair. "This'll just take a second." Victoria tried to dodge, but Rodriguez grabbed her shoulder with his free hand. The scissors flashed in the sunlight as he brought them toward her head. Victoria felt the blades bite through her hair, felt the careful work of hours destroyed in an instant. The sound of the scissors cutting through her hair seemed impossibly loud in the quiet parking lot. A section of Victoria's hair, still perfectly curled from that morning's styling, fell to the asphalt at her feet. For a moment, both of them stood frozen, staring at the severed hair on the ground. Victoria's hand moved instinctively to the side of her head where Rodriguez had cut, feeling the uneven length where her hair had been. Rodriguez seemed to come back to himself for a moment, looking at the scissors in his hand like he wasn't sure how they'd gotten there, but then he saw the expression on Victoria's face, saw the cold fury in her eyes, and his defensive anger kicked back in. "There," Rodriguez said, trying to make his voice sound casual. "Much better. More practical for law enforcement work." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and Rodriguez felt a flicker of unease. There was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there before, something that made him remember that she wasn't just some random citizen he could push around. She was law enforcement too, and there were rules about what happened to people who assaulted federal agents. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Victoria said quietly. Rodriguez forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to him. "What are you going to do? File a complaint? Good luck with that. It's your word against mine, and I'm the one with the badge." Victoria pulled out her phone with slow, deliberate movements. Rodriguez watched nervously as she scrolled through her contacts, wondering who she was calling. Probably some federal supervisor who would file a complaint that would get buried in paperwork. "I want your supervisor here," Victoria said calmly. "Right now." Rodriguez felt a moment of panic, but then his bravado returned. "Fine by me. Sergeant Chen's not going to take the word of some federal paper pusher over one of her own officers." "We'll see," Victoria said simply. As Victoria made her call, Rodriguez tried to convince himself that he was still in control of the situation. He was the local cop. This was his jurisdiction, and he had friends in the department. Whatever complaint this woman filed would probably disappear into the bureaucracy and never be heard from again. But as he watched Victoria speak quietly into her phone, using terms and procedures that sounded far more serious than he'd expected, Rodriguez began to suspect that he might have underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice was starting to whisper that he might have just destroyed his entire career over a moment of petty jealousy and wounded pride. Sergeant Patricia. Chen was reviewing paperwork in her office when the call came in. Rodriguez's voice sounded strange over the radio, a mixture of forced confidence and something that might have been nervousness. "I need a supervisor at my location," Rodriguez said. "Highway 87 parking lot behind the strip mall. Just a routine complaint situation." Chen frowned at the radio. Rodriguez had been having attitude problems lately, and the last thing they needed was another citizen complaint. She grabbed her keys and headed for her patrol car, expecting to find the usual situation: an angry driver arguing about a ticket. The drive to Rodriguez's location took about 10 minutes. As Chen pulled into the parking lot, she could see Rodriguez standing casually next to his patrol car, but something about his posture looked forced. The woman he'd stopped was sitting in her SUV, speaking quietly on her phone. Chen parked and approached Rodriguez first, following standard procedure. "What's the situation here, Rodriguez?" "Simple traffic stop," Rodriguez said, but he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. 15 over the limit? She's upset about getting a ticket and wants to complain about my attitude." Chen looked over at the woman in the SUV. From this distance, she could see that the woman was well-dressed and appeared calm, not like someone who was irrationally angry about a traffic ticket. Something didn't feel right about Rodriguez's story. "Any issues during the stop?" Chen asked. Rodriguez hesitated for just a moment too long. "No issues. Just the usual entitled attitude you get from federal types." "Federal?" Chen's attention sharpened. Interactions with federal agents required extra care and documentation. "What kind of federal?" "She says she works law enforcement, but you know how that goes. Probably some desk job with the Postal Service or something." Chen walked over to the SUV, already noticing details that made her uneasy. There was what looked like a small clump of hair on the asphalt near Rodriguez's patrol car. The woman's hair, which appeared to have been professionally styled, looked uneven on one side. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Chen. I understand you have a concern about this traffic stop?" The woman looked up from her phone, and Chen immediately noticed the intelligence and composure in her eyes. This wasn't someone prone to making frivolous complaints. "Thank you for coming, Sergeant Chen," the woman said, her voice professionally calm. "There was an incident during this stop that goes far beyond the traffic violation." The woman handed Chen her driver's license along with something else. Chen glanced at the license first, noting the name Victoria Johnson and an expensive address. Then she looked at the second item and the blood drained from her face. It was a business card, thick official cardstock with the FBI seal prominently displayed. "Director Victoria Johnson," Chen read silently. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Criminal Justice Information Services Division." Chen's hand started to shake slightly as the full implications hit her. This wasn't just any federal agent. This was one of the most senior law enforcement officials in the country. And somehow Rodriguez had managed to create an incident with her. "Director Johnson," Chen said, her voice carefully controlled, "could you please tell me exactly what happened during this traffic stop?" Victoria's account was precise and factual, delivered in the tone of someone accustomed to giving testimony. She described Rodriguez's increasingly hostile attitude, his inappropriate comments about her appearance and income, and finally the assault with the scissors. As Victoria spoke, Chen found herself looking back and forth between the director and Rodriguez, who was standing by his car trying to look unconcerned. The pieces of hair on the ground suddenly made terrible sense. Officer Rodriguez cut your hair? Chen asked, needing to confirm what she was hearing. With scissors from his utility belt, Victoria confirmed. I have it documented on my phone's voice recorder, which was activated when I felt the situation becoming dangerous. Chen felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. An assault on any citizen would be serious enough, but an assault on an FBI director was a career-ending catastrophe for everyone involved. And from the timestamps Victoria was showing her, Chen realized this incident had occurred just as Victoria was supposed to be arriving at the police station for a scheduled meeting. Ma'am, Chen said carefully, were you perhaps coming to meet with our department today? I was scheduled to meet with Chief Martinez at 4 o'clock, Victoria confirmed, to discuss the federal task force investigating police misconduct in this jurisdiction. The irony was so devastating that Chen actually felt dizzy. Rodriguez had just assaulted the federal official who was coming to investigate police misconduct. The woman who was supposed to be their partner in addressing exactly this kind of behavior. Chen's radio crackled with a call from dispatch. Sergeant Chen, Chief Martinez is asking about the ETA for Director Johnson. Her security detail is getting concerned. Chen looked at Victoria, who nodded permission for her to respond. Dispatch, please inform the chief that Director Johnson has been delayed by an incident. We'll need him to respond to our location immediately. Copy that, Sergeant. Chief Martinez is en route. Chen knew she had to secure the scene and begin damage control, but she also knew there was no controlling this situation. The moment Rodriguez had put those scissors to Victoria's hair, he'd created a federal incident that would ripple through both departments for months. Director Johnson, Chen said, I need to ask Officer Rodriguez for his account of events. Is there anything else you need to tell me before I do that? Just that I'll be needing copies of any body camera footage from Officer Rodriguez's equipment, Victoria said calmly. And I'll need to speak with your Internal Affairs Division. Chen felt her stomach drop. Body cameras. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she'd forgotten about the cameras. If Rodriguez's body camera had captured him assaulting an FBI director, there would be no way to minimize this incident. Chen walked back to Rodriguez, who was now looking significantly less confident. Rodriguez, I need your body camera and your account of what happened here. Nothing happened, Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. I wrote her a ticket, she got mouthy about it, and now she's trying to cause trouble. Rodriguez, Chen said quietly, that woman is FBI Director Victoria Johnson. She was coming to meet with our chief about a federal investigation. Now tell me again what happened. The color drained from Rodriguez's face. FBI Director? He whispered. Rodriguez, did you or did you not cut that woman's hair with scissors? Rodriguez looked over at Victoria, who was back on her phone coordinating with what sounded like federal security protocols. For the first time, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. It was just a joke, Rodriguez said weakly. I didn't mean anything by it. Chen closed her eyes. There it was. The admission that would end Rodriguez's career and probably damage the entire department. She could already imagine the headlines, the federal investigations, the media circus that was about to descend on them. Rodriguez, you're suspended immediately pending investigation, Chen said. Hand over your weapon badge and body camera right now. As Rodriguez slowly complied, Chen could see Chief Martinez's vehicle pulling into the parking lot, followed by what looked like federal SUVs. Victoria's security detail had arrived, along with what Chen suspected were the beginnings of a federal response team. Chen watched as Victoria stepped out of her vehicle to meet the arriving officials. Despite everything that had happened, despite being assaulted by a police officer, Victoria maintained her professional composure and immediately began coordinating the response to the incident. It was clear to Chen that they were dealing with someone who commanded respect at the highest levels of law enforcement, someone who could have Rodriguez arrested with a phone call, someone who could bring federal oversight down on their entire department. And somehow, Rodriguez had thought it would be funny to cut her hair. As Chief Martinez approached with a look of barely controlled panic on his face, Chen realized that this quiet Thursday afternoon had just become the worst day in the department's history. And it was all because one officer had let his ego and prejudice override every bit of training and common sense he'd ever received. The real consequences were just beginning. Chief, Martinez had dealt with crisis situations before, but nothing had prepared him for the scene that greeted him in the strip mall parking lot. Federal vehicles were arriving by the minute, their occupants wearing the serious expressions of people who took threats against their leadership very personally. Victoria Johnson stood in the center of it all, calm and composed despite the chaos swirling around her. She was speaking with what appeared to be her security chief, a tall man who kept glancing at Rodriguez with barely concealed anger. "Chief Martinez," Victoria said as he approached, extending her hand in a professional greeting that somehow made the whole situation feel even more surreal. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Martinez shook her hand, acutely aware that he was greeting someone whose authority extended far beyond his small department. "Director Johnson, I want to apologize immediately for whatever happened here. We're going to get to the bottom of this." "I appreciate that, Chief," Victoria replied. "I think Sergeant Chen can fill you in on the details. Right now, my primary concern is making sure this incident is handled properly, and that your department has the support it needs to address the underlying issues." Martinez felt a moment of confusion. He'd expected anger, demands for Rodriguez's immediate arrest, threats of federal intervention. Instead, Victoria was talking about supporting his department. It was gracious in a way that made Martinez feel even worse about what had happened. Sergeant Chen approached with Rodriguez's body camera and equipment. "Chief, we have a problem. Officer Rodriguez has admitted to cutting Director Johnson's hair with scissors during what should have been a routine traffic stop." Martinez felt the ground shift beneath him. "He what?" "It's all on body camera," Chen continued. "The entire incident, the inappropriate comments, the escalation, and the assault." Martinez looked over at Rodriguez, who was sitting in the back of a patrol car looking like a man whose world had just collapsed. 20 minutes ago, Rodriguez had been a police officer with 12 years of experience. Now he was facing federal charges that could put him in prison. "Director Johnson," Martinez said, turning back to Victoria. "What can we do to make this right?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Well, first I'd like to proceed with the meeting we originally scheduled. This incident actually provides a perfect example of the kind of behavior patterns we're here to address." Martinez blinked. "You still want to have the meeting?" "Of course. This is exactly why federal oversight exists. One officer's poor judgment doesn't reflect on your entire department, but how you handle it from here will." As Victoria spoke, Martinez noticed that media vans were beginning to arrive. Word had gotten out somehow, probably through police scanner traffic, and reporters were setting up across the street. This incident was about to become very public very quickly. "What about Officer Rodriguez?" Martinez asked. "That's up to your internal affairs process and the federal prosecutors," Victoria replied. "I won't be seeking personal revenge, but this can't be swept under the rug either. Actions have consequences." Rodriguez had been listening from the patrol car, and the reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Federal prosecutors, media attention, the end of his career and possibly his freedom, all because he'd let his anger and prejudice override his judgment for a few crucial minutes. Victoria's phone rang, and she stepped aside to take the call. Martinez could hear fragments of the conversation about congressional briefings and media strategies. This incident wasn't just affecting his small department. It was becoming a federal case study. "Chief," Sergeant Chen said quietly, "we're going to need to notify the union, internal affairs, and probably the mayor's office. This is going to be big." Martinez nodded grimly. Within hours, every news outlet in the country would be covering the story of a police officer who assaulted an FBI director. The irony that it happened during an investigation into police misconduct would make it even more newsworthy. Victoria finished her call and returned to the group. "Chief Martinez, I'd like to suggest that we use this incident as a teaching moment. Not just for your department, but for law enforcement nationwide." "What do you mean?" Martinez asked. "Instead of trying to minimize what happened here, let's be completely transparent about it. Let's show how a department should respond when one of its officers crosses the line. Let's demonstrate what accountability actually looks like." Martinez felt a flicker of hope. Victoria could have demanded his resignation, could have brought federal charges against the entire department, could have made this a career-ending disaster for everyone involved. Instead, she was offering a path forward that might actually strengthen his department in the long run. "You'd be willing to work with us on that?" Martinez asked. "It's exactly what I'm here for," Victoria replied. "Police misconduct isn't solved by destroying departments. It's solved by changing culture, improving training, and holding people accountable for their actions." Over the next hour, the parking lot became a coordination center for multiple investigations, Federal agents documented the scene, internal affairs officers interviewed witnesses, and media relations specialists worked to manage the growing crowd of reporters. Rodriguez remained in the patrol car, watching his career dissolve in real time. His union representative had arrived and was trying to prepare some kind of defense, but they both knew the body camera footage would make denial impossible. "The thing I don't understand," Sergeant Chen said to Chief Martinez, "is why Rodriguez did something so obviously destructive. He's not a bad officer normally. Attitude problems, sure, but nothing like this." Martinez had been wondering the same thing. Sometimes good people make terrible decisions when they feel powerless. Rodriguez has been frustrated about his stalled promotion, angry about the federal investigation, resentful about a lot of things. He saw Director Johnson as a symbol of everything that was wrong with his life. So he decided to cut her hair? "People don't think clearly when they're angry," Martinez said sadly. "They make choices that destroy everything they've worked for and they can't take them back." Victoria approached them, having finished coordinating with her team. "Chief Martinez, I think we're ready to move forward with our original meeting. Obviously, we'll need to discuss how this incident fits into the broader patterns we're investigating." "Of course," Martinez agreed. "Director Johnson, I want you to know that Officer Rodriguez's actions don't represent the values of this department." "I understand that," Victoria replied, "but they do represent a failure of systems and oversight that allowed those actions to occur. That's what we're here to fix." As they prepared to leave the scene, Martinez looked back at Rodriguez one more time. The officer who had started the day with a routine traffic stop was now facing federal charges, media scrutiny, and the complete destruction of his career. It had taken less than an hour for Rodriguez to go from being a police officer to being a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and personal prejudice. The scissors that were meant to cut seatbelts in emergencies had instead cut away Rodriguez's entire future. Victoria Johnson, meanwhile, had turned what could have been a disaster for the entire department into an opportunity for reform and improvement. Her grace under pressure and willingness to work constructively even after being assaulted had probably saved several careers and might lead to meaningful changes in how police misconduct was addressed. As the convoy of vehicles prepared to move to the police station for the delayed meeting, Martinez realized that this incident would define his department for years to come. The question was whether it would be remembered as the day they lost control, or the day they chose to change for the better. Rodriguez's moment of poor judgment had created a crisis, but Victoria's professional response was offering them a chance at redemption. Whether they could take advantage of that opportunity would determine the future of everyone involved. 6 months after the incident, Detective James Rodriguez sat in a federal courtroom listening to the judge read his sentence. 2 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, assault on a federal officer, and deprivation of rights under color of law. His police career was over, his pension gone, his reputation destroyed. In the gallery behind him, Rodriguez could see former colleagues from the department. Some looked sympathetic, others looked like they wished they'd never known him. The media was there too, documenting the final chapter of a story that had become a national symbol of police accountability. Victoria Johnson was not in the courtroom. She'd testified at earlier hearings but had chosen not to attend the sentencing. Rodriguez understood why. For her, this case had never been personal. It had been about something larger than both of them. The judge finished reading the sentence and dismissed the court. Rodriguez was led away in handcuffs, but his mind wasn't on the prison term ahead of him. He was thinking about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. The single decision that had destroyed everything he'd worked for. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was conducting her final meeting with Chief Martinez and his reformed leadership team. The department had undergone massive changes in the past 6 months, implementing new training programs, community oversight panels, and stricter disciplinary procedures. "The transformation has been remarkable," Victoria told the assembled officers. 6 months ago, this department was facing a crisis of confidence. Today, you're becoming a model for police reform nationwide. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Rodriguez's moment of destructive judgment had actually catalyzed positive changes that might never have happened otherwise. His assault on Victoria had forced the department to confront systemic issues they'd been avoiding for years. Chief Martinez had initially worried that the federal investigation would destroy his department. Instead, it had given them tools and resources to become better. Community trust was slowly being rebuilt, officer morale was improving, and they were receiving visitors from other departments wanting to learn from their reforms. What happened to Officer Rodriguez was a tragedy for everyone involved, Victoria continued. But we can honor the lesson of that incident by making sure it never happens again. Anywhere. In the months following the incident, Victoria had become an unlikely advocate for police reform rather than police punishment. She spoke at conferences about the importance of addressing systemic issues rather than just punishing individual officers after the fact. That body camera footage from Rodriguez's assault had been viewed millions of times online, but Victoria used it not to shame police officers, but to start conversations about bias, power, and the importance of treating every citizen with dignity and respect. Police work is difficult, Victoria would tell audiences. Officers make split-second decisions under pressure, often in dangerous situations. But that's exactly why character and judgment are so important. That's why training and oversight and accountability matter. Rodriguez's story had become part of that training. Recruits across the country watched the body camera footage and discussed what they would have done differently. They learned about the warning signs of escalating situations and the importance of checking their own biases and emotions. Some officers resented having Rodriguez's failure used as a teaching tool, but most understood its value. The footage showed clearly how quickly a routine interaction could become a career-ending disaster when an officer let personal issues override professional judgment. Back in federal prison, Rodriguez had plenty of time to think about those lessons. He'd been wrong about Victoria, wrong about the situation, wrong about everything. She hadn't been some entitled federal bureaucrat looking down on local cops. She'd been a professional doing her job, someone who'd worked her way up through law enforcement just like he had. The hair he'd cut in a moment of petty jealousy had grown back. The damage to his life never would. Rodriguez had received letters from Victoria twice during his incarceration. Not angry letters or gloating letters, but messages of encouragement about rehabilitation and second chances. She'd written about the importance of learning from mistakes and using that knowledge to help others avoid similar errors. It was a grace that Rodriguez wasn't sure he deserved, but it had started him thinking about what he might do with his life after prison. Some former officers became security guards or private investigators, but Rodriguez found himself thinking about prevention programs, about talking to young officers about the dangers of unchecked anger and prejudice. Victoria's final report on the department had become required reading at police academies nationwide. It didn't focus on punishing bad officers, but on creating systems that supported good ones and prevented bad decisions before they destroyed lives. The goal isn't to catch officers making mistakes, Victoria had written. The goal is to create environments where officers are supported, trained, and held accountable in ways that help them make better decisions under pressure. Chief Martinez had framed a copy of that report in his office, next to a photo of the Reform Department receiving a Community Service Award. The contrast between where they'd been and where they were now was striking. The strip mall parking lot where the incident had occurred looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. Rodriguez's moment of poor judgment had rippled outward, affecting hundreds of officers, thousands of citizens, and ultimately improving police practices across the country. Victoria had returned to her regular duties at the FBI, but she continued to speak about the incident and its aftermath, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a professional sharing lessons learned from a difficult situation. We can't prevent every bad decision, she would tell audiences, but we can create cultures where good decisions are supported and bad decisions have consequences. We can train officers to recognize their own biases and emotions before those factors override their judgment. The scissors that Rodriguez had used to cut Victoria's hair had been entered into evidence and eventually destroyed. But the lesson of that moment lived on in training programs, policy changes, and conversations between officers about the importance of treating every citizen with respect. Rodriguez would be eligible for parole in 18 months. When he got out, he planned to contact Victoria about speaking to young officers about his experience. He wanted to tell them about the moment when anger and prejudice had seemed more important than professionalism, and how that moment had cost him everything. It wasn't much, but it was something. A way to turn his biggest mistake into something that might prevent others from making similar errors. Victoria had shown him that redemption was possible, even after the worst failures. Not redemption that erased consequences, but redemption that created meaning from suffering and wisdom from mistakes. The traffic stop that had destroyed Rodriguez's career had ultimately made law enforcement better for everyone. It was a heavy price to pay for progress, but it was progress nonetheless. And somewhere in the country, a young officer was learning to check their emotions, to treat every citizen with respect, to remember that the badge was a responsibility, not a weapon. Rodriguez's failure had become their foundation for success. It wasn't the legacy he'd wanted, but it was the one that mattered.